30th day, Upper Wind Month. Are you all right, Your Excellency?
I'm good.
But your clothes?
I'm good.
Amod Zulu limped alongside Baroness Zaradnik as they performed their inspection. It was the 5th time he had been asked the same question in as many minutes since they arrived at the city barracks. Though he kept his face straight through the fact that everything hurt, some things just couldn't be masked. There were more parts of him that hurt than there were that didn't, and he had broken and lost more things in the past few days than he cared to think about. The Draconic Kingdom's customs generally kept the nobility separate from commoners when it came to several things, and that included their status in the army. Being kept separate from the rest of the men in training wasn't a law, but the laws that addressed other things created commonly held beliefs and expectations. As such, nobles were trained by other nobles or specially designated specialists in their houses' retinues. Since the qualified individuals no longer existed, Queen Auriculus had asked a favor and had Lady Zaradnik instruct Amod, except her instruction was nothing that Amod had ever seen or heard of before. Between updates on the front line's developments and reviewing the men, they would spend their time together in a secluded part of the palace quarter. With so many estates and gardens left abandoned in the wake of Auriculon's final stand, there were many spots to choose from. And then, she would beat him up. It was supposed to be training, but, if anyone had walked in on them and seen what was going on, they would have surely thought he was being brutally murdered in some discreet location. At first, it wasn't so bad. For the first few hours, he went through drills against a squire zombie raised from the corpses of various beastmen. Death priests healed the undead practice dummies after he slowly whittled them down, and then he would keep whittling away. Unfortunately, a few hours of drills was all he had before the Baroness moved on to practical combat. Like any zombie, squire zombies were slower and clumsier than their living counterparts. This also meant that they were stronger and tougher, as well. This, however, was relative to their level of power, which meant that they moved respectably quickly for someone like him. And when they hit him, his cheek twitched at the memory of his accrued training. Any of his hits that landed mattered little to his undead opponent. Any of their hits that landed broke several bones at once, disemboweled him, or sent his limbs flying. According to Lady Zaradnik, the Death Knight controlling the squire zombies was imitating how the beastmen it had observed fought, making for a reasonable simulation. Just one hit was enough to incapacitate Amod and send him straight to the temples for healing, but for the fact that Miss Lutzi was also present. Whenever he was wounded, she healed him and Lady Zaradnik would instruct him to continue. He thought that he was freed from his torment when the maid ran out of mana, but, then, she pulled out a wand of light cure wounds. That wand had 50 charges. When those charges ran out, she produced another wand. Her foreign-made uniform started to become synonymous with a torturer's garb. Once each training session came to an end, they used magic to clean the exercise area. It occurred to Amod that one could murder someone in the middle of the street and not leave a trace of their deed behind. Yes, relative to his training, the pain he felt now was nothing. At least that was how he convinced himself to continue limping along. In the mustering field of the palace quarters barracks, Captain Seller and his company had divided themselves into dozens of groups, and their training of as many squads of fresh-faced recruits was now in full swing. They were fresh-faced on the first day, at least. On the third day, they looked 10 times as terrible as he felt, though no one was being murdered where they stood as he had been. Even Captain Seller and his men, who had resolved to train their recruits hard, looked more than a bit sorry for them. The source of their torment was, of course, also Baroness Zaradnik, who had come up with a training menu for the Draconic Kingdom's infantry. Amod stole a glance at the noblewoman walking beside him. She wore a smile while they passed the ranks of exhausted men as they performed their drills. He felt that it would be a lovely smile except for the fact that everyone that saw it believed that she savored their suffering. Indeed, the recruits, who sighed wistfully at the sight of the young noblewoman on the first day, now referred to her amongst themselves as the Baroness. She was a baroness, but the image that their tone invoked was that of a dark-eyed, dark-haired villainess seated on her dark throne in a dark castle on a dark mountain surrounded by the forces of darkness. He was fairly certain that she knew that the men had attributed that image to her, but he was too scared to ask how she felt about it. Amod had to admit that it suited her. All she needed was a legendary creature such as a dragon under her heel. A long peal of thunder rolled through the dark clouds overhead. Sheets of rain washed over them seconds later. The men continued performing drills, not daring to seek shelter with the Baroness present. Captain Zaradnik, Captain Seller jogged up to them. Should we have the men hold off on their drills for now? The recruits froze. They watched with bated breaths, as if expecting Captain Seller to be struck down by a thunderbolt. That's a good idea, Captain Seller. Ah, really? Yes, Lady Zaradnik nodded. It's a good opportunity. Have the men run around outside of the city walls. But it's raining. The fields will be churned into mud. I know. Have them carry their practice spears, as well. The men glared daggers at Captain Seller as they filed out of the grounds. Amod did his best not to offer them an apologetic look as they dragged themselves by. Your Excellency? His head turned at the Baroness' voice. She returned his look expectantly. I'm sorry, Captain, Amod said. Were you saying something? No, but why are you standing there? We're going as well. Eh? Conditioning is important, Lady Zaradnik said. It wouldn't do if a captain couldn't keep up with his men. They jogged out of Orakalon under the curious gazes of the citizenry. The recruits on militia duty looked on in horror. The ones being sent on the hellish exercise stared back at them with a "your next" look. Their course brought them through the outer gates and along the banks of the city's moat. The men noticeably slowed as their steps were bogged down by the muddy terrain. Captain Zaradnik, Amod asked, is there some benefit to this over a regular run? A regular run is fine for conditioning, Your Excellency, Lady Zaradnik answered, but a run like this will help you learn how to negotiate difficult terrain. I'm not sure I understand what you're saying. The Baroness pointed to the set of men ahead of them. That group bringing up the rear of the column, do you notice any difference in how each member is moving? Amod peered at the loose cluster of recruits, who were struggling through the mud just as much as he was. One man, a soldier from Highfoot, did not appear to be struggling at all. He frowned at the discrepancy. How is he doing that? It's something that rangers do. We have the ability to ignore the mundane effects of difficult terrain. We? He looked down towards the mud at their feet. Lady Zaradnik was strolling through it as if it was a paved city street. He couldn't even see how she was doing it, it just happened. It's something that develops gradually, the Baroness said. By themselves, people usually don't notice. In a situation like this, however, the observable difference is stark. You'll eventually see the soldiers complete the run incrementally faster depending on how far they've advanced as rangers. Have you done this before? I don't think I've heard of anything like this. Apprentice rangers in my domain start training at the same age as any other apprentice, Your Excellency. You mean to say that they're doing this sort of thing starting at 6 years of age? The training is incorporated into their daily routines. After classes, they go into the forests around their villages to forage and trap. They start hunting around 11 or 12. Was that safe? It probably was, considering how powerful the Sorceress Kingdom's army was. They have years to train, so it's not as intense as what your recruits are doing here. Well, actually, it becomes more intense, but they gradually phase into it, unlike Your Excellency and the men here. Also, since the training is task-oriented and applicable to their daily lives, it's something that they pursue on their own once they learn the basics. So they're allowed to forage, trap and hunt. Do they pay taxes? They serve the same role as foresters, so the arrangement is similar. What do they do after they become journeymen? Masters? I haven't figured out what to call them yet, Your Excellency. Baroness Zaradnik smiled to herself. Using guild designations makes a sort of sense since they are apprentices, but it doesn't feel right. Paladins have squires and clerics have acolytes, so rangers should have something of their own. After they graduate, they'll probably follow the same ranking system that I use in the army. Most of them will end up there, anyway. The Baroness had suggested that the Draconic Kingdom's royal army begin rebuilding by training auxiliary forces to support their least undead security. Rangers that served as reconnaissance were both the most easily achievable and economical option. It appeared that Lady Zaradnik was doing the same for her own people, as well. Amod was too short of breath to speak a quarter of the way around the wall. He kept losing a boot to the mud and nearly fell on his face several times. The recruits ahead of him weren't doing much better. I think we should do something about that uniform. I was thinking just the same thing, my lady. Different versions for different climates, as well. Something like that spring dress you brought with you to the city last year. Are you sure? It was a bit daring. People will be able to see your ankles and everything. These uniforms are tailored for the maids in the city. They won't do for maids serving House Zaradnik. It will be embarrassing at first, but I'm sure we can get used to it. That's if you'll allow your staff to wear flashier uniforms. It's not as if I'm trying to monopolize attention. He looked over his shoulder at the two women idly chatting behind him. Lady Zaradnik's maid accompanied her everywhere while she was in Orakalon, even on their trek through the rain and mud. She wore a uniform customary to maids from the north with black and white fabrics and thick, layered skirts. It was soaked through with the rain and its frilly hem was stained with mud. As for Miss Lutzi herself, she was visibly hampered by the terrain, but, like the Baroness apprentice commanders, she was much stronger than she looked. Baroness Zaradnik and her lady's maid continued chatting throughout the march. The men ahead of them occasionally stole glances at them over their shoulders as they fought their way through the mud. A woman with heavy, rain-soaked skirts was bringing up the rear, so they didn't dare falter. Amod wondered if that part had been calculated, as well. An hour later, they dragged themselves back through the gates of the palace quarter. Once they reached the barracks, most of the men fell onto the rain-soaked grass of the mustering field. He thought it was admirable enough that they didn't collapse on the streets on the way in. Amod's stomach sank as the Baroness turned her cool gaze upon the expended men. Captain Zaradnik, Captain Seller made his way over to stand with them. Any luck with what we talked about on the way here? Countess Wagner said that the Empire was more than happy to liquidate their surplus, Lady Zaradnik replied. Honestly, the reorganization of the Imperial Army over the past year is a gift that keeps on giving. How long until the equipment arrives? The faster we get started on archery, the better. I think they're packing everything up in one shipment. A postal officer will notify you when it arrives. That so? I'll be looking forward to it then. Before we get going, Lady Zaradnik said, did you take a look at those manuscripts the Marshal brought out yesterday? I did, Captain Seller nodded, but I can only make sense of a few of the pages. I see. Well, there's no big hurry for that part. I was just hoping that you army veterans could decipher them now that you're well seasoned. The manuscripts that the Baroness spoke of were bits and pieces of martial knowledge stored in the palace archives. Adamant that the Draconic Kingdom had its own unique school of combat, she sent Amod to find what he could between daily training and review. He followed Lady Zaradnik back to the palace. Captain Seller's voice bellowed out as they stepped onto the road and started up the hill. Get off your asses and pick up those spears. Back to drills. Eh? Don't eh? Me. Our enemies ain't gonna wait for us to catch our breath at the end of a march. Winded shouts of men thrusting their spears drifted through the air. Amod shook his head. Is pushing the recruits that hard necessary? He asked. It gets easier, Your Excellency, Lady Zaradnik answered. Right now, those recruits are city folk starting from zero. The way that the Draconic Kingdom uses urban centers as recruitment hubs means that the soldiers of Highfoot also started from the same point. They don't come from some outstanding pedigree or benefit from a privileged upbringing, so everyone understands that they, too, can become as strong as the heroes of Highfoot. Once they start making tangible gains, their motivation will improve, or they could grow lazy and useless, but I'm sure your officers know what to do about that. The Highfoot garrison fought hard battles to get to where they are, though. They did, the Baroness replied, but the recruits don't need to begin with life and death battles. Once they're grounded in the basics and meet a certain standard, you can start thinking about how to challenge them. Well, maybe I'm being too whimsical. Ultimately, it's a budget like any other. For the moment, the Royal Court of the Draconic Kingdom has only allocated enough to lay the groundwork for a reformed army. You won't be able to do what I'm putting Your Excellency through for 100,000 recruits. There are still all those other things we've spoken about to address, and they all demand financing and personnel. Thus far, everything they discussed seemed like a long list of distant dreams. In addition to training rangers to support patrols of least undead, there was the engineering corps, air cavalry, higher integration of divine and magic casters, naval forces, military academy and a short list of other things which seemed to grow longer over time. To put it bluntly, Lady Zaradnik described what the Baharuth Empire had and the Royal Court also wanted it. Then he was allocated a small fraction of the Draconic Kingdom's eviscerated budget to turn it into a reality. This, of course, was impossible. It had taken the Imperial army over a century to become what it was in the present day, and, even if the Draconic Kingdom had unlimited resources, there were many aspects of a military that took time to cultivate. All he could do was make sure their domestic security needs were met, a fraction of the rangers that they needed were trained, and a rudimentary engineering corps was put together to help with the various infrastructure projects that were long overdue. Beyond that, he could only pray that the country prospered and the budget was allowed to expand. Just before they reached the palace grounds, Lady Zaradnik's steps slowed for a moment before she picked up her pace.
"What happened?" he asked.
"A message from the war room," she answered. "Our forces positioning to attack Rivergarden are being intercepted." Despite the feeling of urgency, the war room was hardly a hive of frenzied activity when they arrived. Several elder liches armed with plotting rods moved markers on the map around, while others floated above the table taking notes. Even the living staff members looked more curious than concerned.
"How long did it take?"
Lady Zaradnik asked. Amod frowned, then took a closer look at the map. Across the Orakelon, to the southwest of Rivergarden, the shore was littered with markers indicating Beastman forces. Wiluvian handed her baby to the elder lich standing behind her, and then she picked up a plotting rod leaning against the table. "A little over 5 minutes, Captain," Wiluvian replied. "The Beastmen conducted an amphibious assault while we were staging."
"How many did they lose?"
"None, as far as we can tell." Wiluvian raised her rod and pointed to the site of the battle. High-altitude observation counted 10 vessels that are roughly the same size as the Draconic Kingdom's river barges. We estimate that each one carried around 200 beastmen. "More warriors, then, or is it the same group from before?" "No, the ones that stopped the first wave are still dispersed along the forced river. This group came from further east." "What's our count of vessels near Corin on the lake now?"
497.
"They appear to all share the same rough dimensions." Did that mean that the Beastmen could launch an assault of 100,000? After the fall of Eastwatch, they had taken everything up to Rivergarden with shocking speed. The Draconic Kingdom knew that the Beastmen had ships, but they didn't know they employed them so extensively. How large does a country need to be able to commit 500 vessels to an invasion? Lady Zaradnik murmured. "Headquarters can only make comparative guesses," Wiluvian said. "In terms of displacement, the only country that can match what we've seen in the Draconic Kingdom is the Holy Kingdom of Roble, and the Holy Kingdom is a maritime state. The river networks in Riestais and Baharuth are minor relative to the ones in the Draconic Kingdom. With how many vessels we're seeing here, plus the idea that this Beastman invasion is a migration, we can only assume that the Beastman country that the Draconic Kingdom is at war with, if they even considered it a war in the first place, utterly dwarfs the human nations of this region." Amod bit his lip as his eyes went over the markers on the map, then the occupied provinces of his homeland. Queen Auriculus made no secret of the fact that she believed that the Beastmen used the Draconic Kingdom as a hunting preserve, which was evidenced in the systematic way that they managed their raids. Her subjects, however, wanted to believe that they were more than a convenient, self-replenishing and self-managing food source. "What will you do now?" he asked. "The Death Seer's squad's orders will remain as is for now," Lady Zaradnik answered. "Going by the measured response to these two offensives, the Beastman commanders are trying to get a feel for the threat that we represent. Since they hit the second wave while it was still gathering, I can only assume that they've deployed reconnaissance forces, as well. Commander Lynham, did we detect anything along those lines?"
"Yes, Captain."
The half-elf commander shifted her plotting rod. "Scouts of various species are spreading out from where the two battles took place. I can't imagine that we've detected all of them, but based on the ones that we have, they're going as far as the first line of villages and returning to report their findings." "Did they attack any of the undead that we scattered about?" Wiluvian's lip twitched slightly. "We lost a cow-type zombie beast. The beastman who attacked it was probably disappointed to find that it wasn't edible, and the elder lich that was dominating it is annoyed that they're now one short of a full complement." As a part of the ongoing illusion that was being woven, an additional contingent of elder liches had brought tens of thousands of weak undead from Katza that fell into the human settlement category to place in the depopulated villages along the front. According to Lady Zaradnik, populating human farms with the undead beastmen that they had been building up throughout the counter-offensive wouldn't look right. He could only assume that she knew what she was talking about. Have you been able to take a look at how they handle their logistics yet? Lady Zaradnik asked.
They're being supplied from the east, Waluvian answered.
So far,
we haven't noticed any stockpiles being built.
Supplies are going between tribal holdings, and the closest ones to the front appear to serve as distribution nodes. Until that logistical scheme changes, headquarters is reasonably certain that they will remain on the defensive.
Even if they plan on staying where they are, the Baroness said, they'll still try to find out as much as they can. We can't let any long-range scouts break through the front.
Yes, Captain. Following recommendations from headquarters, we've switched to low-altitude reconnaissance 10 kilometers into our side of the front. Cover is poor and intermittent at best, especially since the fields haven't been sown, so the patrols should be tight enough to thwart any beastmen below Orichalcum. Anything above that is rare enough that they probably wouldn't risk them on that sort of task. On that note, what's our tally for their powerful members so far?
It's difficult isolating them. We can say with confidence that an Orichalcum equivalent individual leads each regiment, or whatever they call them.
Their organization is distinct from the civilian tribes we've been chasing around so far. The sergeants whose forces participated in the battles also estimate that the average mature member of each regiment is at least the equivalent of a platinum or mithril-ranked warrior.
What does their distribution of mystics look like?
Do they have anything that resembles an anti-undead vocation?
It's roughly 1 mystic for every 40 beastmen.
The Elder Liches haven't identified any spells above 3rd tier being cast. They mostly operate in a backline support role and haven't used any offensive spells, and we haven't seen any uses of turn undead.
That's quite lopsided, but I suppose it should be expected.
Expected, Captain.
Amod frowned. It's a general thing, Lady Zaradnik replied.
Demi-humans and heteromorphs excel at what they are, in a natural sense, but struggle at what they aren't. The ones that we're fighting have a natural tendency towards warrior vocations, and their capability as casters suffers as a result. A demi-human race that is a natural arcane caster, on the other hand, would struggle to do well as a warrior. Additionally, our observations of the civilian tribes over the past month show that they have roughly 1 mystic for every 20. There are more magic casters in the civilian population. Think of all the priests, alchemists and artisans in your cities compared to the ratio of casters in the army and adventurer guild, so it stands to reason that the same would happen for the beastmen. That should mean humans can match demi-humans and heteromorphs, but I don't think we do. It's easier to notice the difference in industrial fields, but I suppose you don't have any convenient references for that. As far as military concerns go, it's not so straightforward. If you locked a human fighter and an fighter into a cage and had them fight to the death, a suitably equipped human fighter would achieve parity around the realm of heroes. Not all demi-humans are equal, however. Goblins are weaker than humans from the start, while many true giants are comparable to the average heteromorph or even surpass them. Heteromorphs similarly have differences between them, with true dragons being near the top. If that's the case, then what's the point in training rangers for our royal army? By what you said just now, a beastman ranger would be superior in every aspect until the realm of heroes.
That's not what I said, Lady Zaradnik told him. I said that if they were fighters, they would achieve parity around the realm of heroes. While both fighters and rangers are warriors, fighter and ranger are 2 distinct vocations.
Nah, for lack of a better way to describe it, get a head start as a warrior. This head start comes from a combination of their physical power, size, natural weapons and armor, certain sensory advantages, and general toughness. The thing is that unlike gnolls, are not specifically rangers from a racial perspective. This means that, all else being equal, a human ranger is a better ranger than an ranger at everything rangers do aside from melee combat.
For close combat, you have Death Series servitors.
The purpose of your rangers is to find targets for them to hit. You have a huge border to patrol, so the more rangers you have, the tighter your security becomes. Additionally, that's only for warrior tribes. If a civilian tribe attempts to raid your border, a squad of gold rank equivalent rangers will easily put a stop to them without needing to signal for assistance. Had they been doing the wrong thing the whole time? The military doctrines of the Draconic Kingdom accepted that loss was inevitable against their physically superior foe and thus trading lives was acceptable. In hindsight, the slain theocracy never fought that way. Their tactics revolved around preserving the lives of their soldiers, as they considered human life precious. They relied heavily on summons from magic casters that sheltered behind fortifications and unbreakable defensive formations, wreaking havoc on the beastmen from afar. For whatever reason, the Draconic Kingdom rationalized it as something that only the theocracy could do because it was a strong country with centuries of development behind it. With the revelations brought by Baroness Saradnik, however, he was starting to believe that becoming independently strong, at least pound for pound, was well within the Draconic Kingdom's grasp. "Captain," Willuvian said, "now that the front is taking a breath, how should we approach the southern provinces? We've barely started scouting them. Headquarters hasn't proposed anything?" The half-elf shook her head. Baroness Saradnik sighed. "I suppose our strategists can hardly craft an offensive without information," she said. "Well, that's fine. I'll be taking a personal look." "You will?" Amot asked. "A companion of mine will be arriving in Orakalon shortly," Lady Saradnik answered with a warm smile. "We'll have a good idea of how things look by the time the replacement forces from Katza arrive." First day, Middle Wind Month, 1 CE, B Beastman. The man shrieked. "Hi-ee!" Zushiru shrieked back. Ilishnish unbent her human frame and popped her head out of the cargo container. Both the human merchant and Zushiru were cowering on the ground. She frowned and came out to address the man. "How rude." She placed her hands on her hips. "Master Shiro is a Quagua." "A Quagua?" The merchant peeked out from behind his raised arms. "Not a beastman? Does he look like a beastman to you?" Ilishnish pointed a finger at the mole beastman. "Well, he is a lot shorter than a beastman." "Zushiru is not short." The mole beastman stood up and brushed himself off. "Zushiru is of fine stature for a blue Quagua." The human merchant picked himself up. He still looked a bit dubious, but he swallowed and mustered the courage to approach Zushiru's stand. "Thank you, wife," Zushiru said. "The humans here are far more panicky than the ones in the Empire." "Wife?" The man froze. "Is it so strange for a male in possession of good fortune to have a wife?" Zushiru asked. No." The human merchant unfroze and pulled a notebook out from a belt pouch. That's normal, I think." "Zushiru has many children on the way too," the Quagua merchant put on a proud look. The human merchant froze again. His brown eyes shifted back and forth between Ilishnish and Zushiru. Congratulations." "Why thank you, good human." Zushiru's toothy smile set the man back 3 paces. "Now, what can Zushiru do for you today?" Ilishnish returned to the container, sniffing at the contents within. Now on a fresh new trading tour, the Quagua merchant had resumed the pursuit of his ambitions. His ambitions had grown immeasurably, however, and what was originally a set of conventional wagons stocked with an assortment of goods was now 5 cargo containers filled with high-grade iron from the Azalizia Mountains. Other containers were stocked with refined metals, steel tools and industrial appliances. "I didn't know dragons had an appetite for iron ore." The voice came from directly behind her. In any other situation, Ilishnish would have started at its suddenness, but Lady Saradnik was a constant presence in the corner of her mind. "We don't," Ilishnish replied. "I'm just trying to figure out what it is exactly that makes this high grade. I can sense it, but that sense doesn't explain why it's as valuable as it is." According to Smith Kovalev, high-grade ores have fewer impurities, which results in fewer reagents being consumed in the refining process and thus generating less slag. That makes it cheaper, less time-consuming and less harmful to the environment to turn into steel. "I'll take your word for it," Ilishnish said. "What about these scrolls?" "I don't think they're spells. Those are a mess waiting to happen. Honestly, I have no clue about the extent of the chaos they'll cause." Ilishnish backed away from the boxes of paper tubes. Lady Saradnik made them seem far more dangerous than they appeared. Her mistress reached out to take Ilishnish's hand in hers. "Have you eaten yet?" "The barge was annoyingly slow," Ilishnish replied, "so I caught some fish along the way." "What?" "That was poaching," Lady Saradnik told her. "How was that poaching?" "I purposely left whoever's domain this is to get those fish. The territories along your route are all within the Draconic Kingdom's borders, or they're the territory of aquatic demi-human tribes. It's not illegal for the Sorceress Kingdom's citizens to raid and eat outsiders, but we're trying to cultivate a good relationship with the Draconic Kingdom. Doing so includes respecting the treaties that they have with their neighbors."
It's not as if I can see any stupid treaty in the water. Life would be a lot simpler if dragons ruled everything. Well, now you know. Make sure you pay for the damages. Elishnish whimpered as she was dragged along. Why did everything have to cost money? Hopefully, she would be able to offer something worthless that they found valuable. Back in front of the offloaded containers, Zushiru sat behind his stand on a tall wooden stool. The human merchant from before was examining one of the dangerous-sounding rolls of paper. Conceal yourself, I want to see how he does. Elishnish did as Lady Zaradnik instructed. They watched the interaction between the two merchants from a few meters away. Has this contract been drawn in error? The human merchant squinted at the page. This is well below the prices that the royal court has been distributing oats for. I thought they were from the same place. Zushiru does not know whether the goods are from the same place, but they are from the same market. Besides, what do you care if it is in error? It would be an error in your favor, yes? The human merchant rubbed his chin, bringing the parchment closer to his face as if he could discern some secret by doing so. Despite his show of scrutiny, his increased heart rate indicated his excitement over what he saw. What's your price? 40 platinum trade coins. A 5% markup, huh, fine, you got a deal. I'll buy 4 more if you have them. Zushiru reached into the satchel slung over his shoulder, producing 4 more scrolls. The man examined each before pulling out his Merchant Guild account book. Will a paper transaction be fine? He asked. Of course, Zushiru said. While you are here, Zushiru would also like to know whether you can obtain contracts for certain goods. Certain goods? Yes, Zushiru's nose went up and down and up again in an imitation of a human nod, then placed a parchment on the table. This is a list of what Zushiru seeks. Wool's no good, the merchant said. Those damn beastmen ate all of our livestock. I'll have to see about the flax and cotton. What are you offering? The Quagoa recited his offers for each of the listed goods. When he was done, the merchant looked around the empty section of the waterfront before leaning closer. Do you have any more of these grain contracts? Zushiru has 200 more. Elishnish frowned as the man's pulse went wild. He wasn't going to explode, was he? 200. All right, just hold on to those if you can. I'll see what I can do about your list. The man pulled a stick of charcoal out of a pocket and took a minute to copy the list on the table, and then he quickly paced back toward the city. Elishnish looked at Lady Zaradnik. Her mistress had a long frown on her face. What was that all about? It's still too early for you. Early? Don't forget that I'm 6 times your age. Whenever Lady Zaradnik said that it was too early for Elishnish, it meant that she thought that Elishnish would do something inappropriate with the knowledge. It seemed like something to do with merchants, so she would just have to ask Lady Wagner whenever they next met. A quiet sigh rose from Zushiru's stand. Elishnish and Lady Zaradnik unconcealed themselves. I told you it would be better to bring your apprentices and new hires with you, Elishnish said. But Zushiru wanted to see what it was like, first. They said it was a dangerous place. Human employees are fragile, and Zushiru is stronger than Zushiru's apprentices. How can it be dangerous? Elishnish scoffed. It's a place filled with humans. This exclave is officially the Sorceress Kingdom's territory, Lady Zaradnik said. If you feel threatened, you can just summon security. What new hires was Dame Veriling referring to, by the way? You had Miss Gran and her acquaintances the last time. 8 humans, Zushiru replied. 6 females and 2 males. Zushiru tested them in the Erantal main plaza to see how favorably other humans reacted to them. Lady Zaradnik silently shook her head, but Elishnish couldn't sense anything wrong with what Zushiru said. If it was one thing she had learned about her mistress, it was that her marketing skills beyond her optics as a human lord were as terrible as Master Tian's. Why did you choose to come to the Draconic Kingdom? Lady Zaradnik asked. I heard that you had great success in the Empire. Zushiru thinks there is greater opportunity in the Draconic Kingdom. Goods can be quickly transported in great quantities by ship, while the Empire still uses wagons drawn with horses. This water goes beyond, as well, yes? The potential for trade in the Empire is incomparable to this. You sound like my friends, Lady Zaradnik muttered. Said friends were merchants, so it made sense that they would sound like other merchants. Zushiru slid off of his stool and waddled off to inspect his inventories. Ilishnish turned her gaze up at the palace looming to the east. "Is Master Tien here?" Ilishnish asked. That swearwoman was asking after him. "Lord Tien is in the northwest with the Queen and her court," Lady Zaradnik answered. "He's on official business, so I hope you didn't say anything you weren't supposed to." I have no idea what I wasn't supposed to say, but she only asked if I knew how he was doing. I told her what you told me, that he was very well received by the ladies of the court, the Queen was fond of him, and he was attending to her very closely. "I see. Well, shall we get going? You wanted to do a flyover of the Beastman country before going there by land, right?" "Yes, that's right. Thank you for agreeing to come with me, by the way." The hand holding hers squeezed lightly. Lady Zaradnik offered her a warm smile. "I can't promise that I'll always be available, but I'll be there for you whenever I can. I'd like to take a look, as well, so it's not an entirely one-sided thing." Ilishnish assumed her natural appearance and Lady Zaradnik helped her equip the saddle they had used in the Empire. After equipping the item during their time in the Empire, she was fairly certain that it had some sort of mobility and stamina-boosting enchantment. "Any problem with how I put this thing on?" "It's a magic item, so I think it will adjust to me regardless." Her mistress mounted her and they took flight low over the water, skimming over the river for a kilometer before rising into the air. The landscape was entirely new to her, but she could see things resembling what one might see over the Katza River Valley. Everything was neatly arranged into vineyards, orchards, fields and copses, though they appeared to be behind the season. "Where does this Beastman country start, exactly?" Ilishnish asked. "It sort of sticks out in the northeast between the Draconic Kingdom and the Wyvern Rider territories. I'm not sure how large it is, but it's probably bigger than any country that we know of based on what we've seen come out of it." "Oh good, that's where I left Pinecone and Pebble. I was half afraid you'd bring them to Orokalon with you. Zushiro looks different enough from a beastman, but the Felid Kronos would surely start a mass panic. I hope that means assuming their appearance will be good enough for this beastman country." "It probably is. Florine spent a lot of time interviewing the beastmen that we captured. Their relationship with the Draconic Kingdom aside, it's not too far off from Riastais or the Empire in the sense that they're all tribal societies. Social races seem to all develop the same way. By contrast, a dragon or powerful magical beast just dominates their entire territory on their own and maybe allows mates to linger about." I suppose that might be true, but what about the Draconic Kingdom?" "The Draconic Kingdom is a human country. It has the same sorts of tribal structures, but they've gone a step beyond the countries in the north. You could say that the Empire is aiming for the degree of centralization that the Draconic Kingdom has, but the Draconic Kingdom has achieved it without sacrificing what the Empire does." "But there is a dragon here, yes? I can feel it. Her domain is so vast that I can only imagine that she's at least twice as powerful as the Viridian Dragon Lord." "Well, she is styled the Black-Scaled Dragon Lord. Queen Auricula's is a descendant of the Brightness Dragon Lord, descended from a pairing between dragon and human. Since we're heading northeast, we can stop by and meet her if you'd like." No thank you." "Why not?" "She's a nice person. It's just instinct. I'm currently intruding upon her domain and the last thing I want to do is appear in front of her." "If you insist. With the way things are going, I'm sure you'll have plenty of opportunities to meet." Ilishnish blinked one set of eyelids, and then another, looking back at Lady Zaradnik before focusing her attention on the landscape again. She in no way wanted to be exposed to plenty of opportunities to be swatted out of existence. A bit over an hour later, they crossed over the foothills along the northeastern border of the Draconic Kingdom. The cultivated lands abruptly gave way to a dense jungle that crept up ranges of low mountains. A light drizzle slicked her scales and mist filled the shadowed valleys below. "How are you going to find them?" Lady Zaradnik asked. "I told them to wait for me on the first row of peaks overlooking the coastal plain," Ilishnish answered. "When you fly as fast as I do, it doesn't take long to cover that area. Didn't you come into the Dead March on Ruin's Wake last night? I'm not sure if they'd be there so quickly." "They'll be there. Those fellows are very fast as far as terrestrial creatures are concerned. They can cross well over 100 kilometers of mountainous terrain in a day." "Really? They trickled into Warden's Vale over months. I thought they'd be much slower than that." "Well, it's not as if they have to always move that quickly. Plus,
The little piece of murderous fluff that's with them can cast flight magic.
I don't understand why you see them like that. They're so cute.
If you were lit on fire and chased by a swarm of them trying to kill you with lightning bolts, you'd probably change your mind. She eventually spotted her traveling companions just below a mountain peak above a human structure that Lady Zaradnik called Hyfort. After circling the peak 3 times to make sure there wasn't anything nasty waiting for her, she alighted on a crag above the overhang that the Kronos sheltered under. Lady Zaradnik dismounted and hopped down to greet them. Ilishnish assumed her Kronos appearance before following. The 2 Felid Kronos looked up from the remains of a goat.
My apologies for interrupting your evening meal, Lady Zaradnik said.
The image of an alpine vale bathed in warm sunlight filled her mind.
With the light tapping of cloven hooves, the Kronos druid stepped forward. On all fours, it stood no higher than Lady Zaradnik's knee.
Ahem. Will this speech suffice for our destination?
The known denizens of the jungles to the east communicate in this manner, Lady Zaradnik replied, so it should work out fine.
I am both surprised and thankful that you offered to accompany Dame Verilyn.
The Seeker of Song's request is aligned with my interests. The Seeker of Song?
It is who she is.
Like you. The Warden of the Vale. The Seeker of Song.
Lady Zaradnik looked at Ilishnish.
It's not wrong, Ilishnish shrugged.
As far as others are concerned, it is the more relevant name. I was thinking of using it as an alias in the Beastman country. I'm not sure if that will translate very well,
Lady Zaradnik said.
Those names are more like epithets, or titles, which can attract unwanted attention. If you're traveling abroad, you should use a name that's been entrenched as one in its own right, and thus won't translate into its literal meaning, or use something that can be commonly recognized as a name.
She had a point.
People's names usually had a meaning behind them, but that meaning was rarely conveyed directly. To those of one race, names employed by another race usually came out as a set of sounds, gestures or visible patterns that those other races could make.
I think it would be for the best if we went with the latter, Ilishnish said.
Having common names will attract less attention. At most,
they'll be perceived as quaint. I'd like to avoid any trouble, if possible.
According to Lady Zaradnik, the beastmen they were going to be dealing with were not too different from any other tribal society. That meant things that attracted attention also brought trouble. A complex name might be seen as pretentious and invite reprisal or mark one as a challenging target.
Then,
is Pinecone acceptable? What about Pebble? I don't think there's anything wrong with them,
Lady Zaradnik said.
Names are pretty simple things. Don't human nobles have 4 names?
Ilishnish said. I don't have 4 names, Lady Zaradnik replied. That's just a northerner thing.
Nobles from Roble and the Draconic Kingdom don't have multiple names, either.
This one requires a name, the Kronos druid bleated.
I figured that we could just pass you off as food, Ilishnish said.
Lady Zaradnik frowned at her.
No one's going to want to come with you on your assignments if they find out your traveling companions get eaten, she told Ilishnish, then looked down at the Kronos druid.
What sort of name would you like?
Names like theirs. The violent ball of fluff gestured at the 2 Kronos rangers.
In that case, Lady Zaradnik said, who are you?
A bleat came in response. A myriad of images and sensations entered Ilishnish's awareness. Central to them was a river roaring down a mountain valley, its waters churned white with the violence of its course.
Vltava, Lady Zaradnik said.
Wild water. This is acceptable, Vltava flicked his ear.
Thank you, Warden.
Lady Zaradnik smiled and reached down to stroke Vltava's woolen coat. Ilishnish peered suspiciously at the interaction. People usually didn't go around petting other people like that. Jealous?
What? No.
Your tail is pretty floofy as well. Can I touch it? Ilishnish backed away. She returned to her natural appearance. Interactions as another race always led to all sorts of funny feelings, and she didn't want to know what would happen if Lady Zaradnik got a hold of her tail.
We should get going, Lady Zaradnik said. I have no idea how large this country is,
so we may have a long flight ahead of us.
We will rest and wait here for you, Vltava bleated.
They took off from the craggy peak, circling high above the canyon where Hyfort was situated. Lady Zaradnik leaned forward to look over Ilishnish's left shoulder.
I can't see anything.
It's all mist-filled valleys.
I can see everything just fine. But I wanted to take a look as well, Lady Zaradnik said. I wonder if there's a magic item that allows one to see through weather effects. The rainy season that they have here is going to hamper our reconnaissance. The terrain is new to me, but it's not anything special. Just mountains and jungle and rivers. Do you see any beastmen in the vicinity of Haifat? Any settlements? I haven't noticed any beastmen yet. There are a few settlements along the river. Do they compare to anything you've seen? Wooden buildings. Hide coverings for doors and windows are extensively employed. Huts that use bricks of mud, I think. How do those not wash away in this rain? Some of the demi-human tribes in the Sorceress Kingdom use those construction techniques. The mud is reinforced by plant matter and protected by some sort of coating. Do you see any stone structures? Do excavated cliffs count? Maybe. I was wondering about any fortifications they might have. Are you going to attack them? Not here, Lady Zaradnik said, but since they've moved into the Draconic Kingdom, they may resort to the same methods there. How they defend the occupied towns and cities may also be tied to how they employ their defenses at home. You're overcomplicating things, Elishnish told her. If the beastmen stand their ground, just crush them with your strongest forces. I can't assume that the Sorceress Kingdom's forces will always enjoy an overwhelming advantage in raw power. It's not healthy for the undead force's development, either. I had no idea that undead had health concerns. I'm referring to their mental health. Fostering the wrong attitudes and thinking will be detrimental in the long run. They crossed over the mountains and into another set of valleys that ran parallel to one another. The rivers flowing through them joined at the two valleys' southwestern ends. Another of the fortresses along the Draconic Kingdom's border stood over the confluence, which Lady Zaradnik said was Orsfort. Fortresses were built at every jungle valley exit, each one of them absent of any human activity. I don't understand what these humans are doing, Elishnish said. Do those fortifications have any effect? The effect is limited, Lady Zaradnik replied. Castles and fortresses are useful against armies that rely on proper logistics, as they serve as a base from which defenders can sortie and raid supply lines. Before the invasion, the beastmen came here to hunt, so the fortresses instead acted as bases linking patrol routes. They may have also attracted the more powerful warrior beastmen looking for a challenge, which would have greatly mitigated the damage done to the civilian population. These humans seem well adapted to their situation. People mostly give me funny looks whenever I say that. I'm sure the Draconic Kingdom will be reaping the hard-earned progress that they've made after we've secured their borders. Their flight eventually brought them to the end of the series of fortresses along the Draconic Kingdom's border. A jungle plateau roughly 100 kilometers across stretched out below them. This looks like a safe place for you to enter from the north, Lady Zaradnik said. Those territories between Haifat and here might be aware of the undead patrolling the border, so it would be suspicious if you inexplicably showed up there. Do you think so? What's to the north of this plateau? More mountain plateau. The Wyvern Rider tribes are out there somewhere, as well, but their territory follows a river northeast. Turn north, we should see what the furthest extent of this beastman country is. Elishnish banked north, following the plateau as it slowly grew arid. Eventually, the clouds shrouding the landscape dissipated. Lady Zaradnik leaned forward to eye the features below. I think I see some settlements, she said, but I can't tell what's living in them. Felid beastmen with tan-colored fur. Do any of them have manes? No. Then those should be the con. What are they like? They're the smallest of the Felid beastmen that we've been fighting. What they lack in raw power, however, they make up for in long-range endurance. As for their personalities, it's hard to tell what they're like normally since we've presented them with a fearsome, unrelenting enemy that can't be negotiated with. After flying north for an hour, the landscape around them changed. On the northwestern horizon was a valley filled with towering limestone pillars. To the northeast was a large lake. In the east, the mountains started rising above the tree line. Those pillars should be the territory of the Wyvern Rider tribes, Lady Zaradnik said. I didn't know that their lands were so expansive. Do you see anything around that lake? Nothing substantial enough to stand out from this far, Elishnish said. It's another 100 kilometers to that lake. Would you like to take a look? What does it look like between here and there? There are still con tribes below us, but they're thinning out. These conditions are likely poorer hunting grounds. Oh, wait.
A sense of danger fell over her and she swerved eastward. What's wrong?
Someone's domain, Elishnish replied. Going by the swampy terrain past these mountains, it's a black dragon. We're flying at a low altitude, so it's probably better not to intrude. I'll have to make a note of that, Lady Zaradnik said. Maybe the Wyvern Rider tribes know something about it. The mountains to the east grew higher, and, eventually, Elishnish started to see snow and ice on their northern slopes. Beyond, the ranges only grew taller and more massive, crowned by fields of ice with glaciers flowing down every alpine valley. These look much larger than the Azalizia Mountains. They are, Elishnish agreed. I don't sense any frost dragon domains, though, which is unsettling. Why is that? Well, this is undeniably a nice place to claim as territory. Hundreds of my siblings stayed faithful to their nature and fled from my father's tyranny, so some of them should have come this way looking for a new home. Even if they weren't part of my father's broods, frost dragons should have come to settle from elsewhere. If they're not here, it should mean that some other powerful things reside here that keep us out. Are the beastmen here? Elishnish examined the terrain below. I see all sorts of demi-humans, but none of the beastmen races that we've passed over so far. We're on the northern slopes of this mountain range, so it's an entirely different drainage basin. You're right, Lady Zaradnik said. We shouldn't be far from the territories of the City-State Alliance. Let's cross back over to the southern slopes. They flew over the snow-capped ranges to the other side, which revealed a jungle landscape that stretched to the horizon. Lady Zaradnik released a sigh. This looks endless. I'm guessing we have beastmen below us now. It's mostly those Con you mentioned. Their settlements started appearing again on the lower slopes of these mountain valleys. Is that infrastructure? I see unpaved roads and bridges, I think. I see them, Elishnish said. Ships in the river below us, as well. Ooh, they have Nook. I haven't had one for a long time. They call them Nug. It's some subspecies of Nook that they raise in the jungle. Speaking of which, I was thinking of bringing some Nook to my territory. What do you think? It should be fine, Lady Zaradnik said. You don't even have to bring them from the Azalizia Mountains. There are herds of them in the southern border ranges north of the Abelian Wilderness, so they may have migrated over on their own, anyway. I hope Heginmol doesn't realize that. He likes his Nook just a bit too much. Ah, there's a city. Where? Off my right wing. Oh, the clouds are back. Elishnish descended to a lower elevation, dropping just below the rainy ceiling over the jungle. The city was markedly distinct from human ones, and she only identified it as one due to its size. I can't even estimate how many people live there, Lady Zaradnik said. The architecture is foreign to me. Well, I suppose that's why Lady Shultier is sending you out here. About that, since the Sorceress Kingdom is supposed to be friendly with the Draconic Kingdom, will the transportation network even be able to expand here? Probably not at this moment. Even so, what you learn may be invaluable elsewhere. This Beastman country may have things we know nothing about or trade with unknown countries on their other borders. She circled over the city several times in the darkness, trying to make sense of what she could through the gaps in the canopy. From what she saw, the city was populated by Con. A mix of the dwellings she saw from before as well as those that took advantage of the trees filled the urban jungle. Let's head back up, Lady Zaradnik said. Try and see if you can find the Oraculon. It should be the largest river in this basin. They went back above the clouds and Elishnish followed the river that ran past the city. An hour later, they flew over another city on the banks of a huge river. We should be above it right now, Elishnish said. The rivers south of here are flowing into this one. What else do you see? Lady Zaradnik asked. There are 5 cities within 100 kilometers of where we are. All of them are larger than the one we flew over earlier. Just how huge is this place? Lady Zaradnik muttered. Do you see any especially large cities down there? There are 2 large ones and 3 smaller ones. Where should we go? What does river traffic look like? It's busy going both ways. There are hundreds of ships down there. I wonder if this country will even feel anything when we push them out of the Draconic Kingdom. The sheer scale of this place is absurd. Their flight so far had covered over twice the breadth of the Baharuth Empire. Elishnish wondered how long her assignment would take. Follow the Oraculon upriver, Lady Zaradnik said.
Let's see if we can locate anything like a capital. Elishnish winged her way east, cutting over the meandering course of the mighty river. They flew over 2 more cities before a particularly huge one on the shores of a 50-kilometer-long lake came into view.
"There's an even bigger city coming up," she said. "How big?"
200 square kilometers, about. It's mostly on the shore and creeps up the mountain valleys. That's 50 times the land area of our winter. Is it safe to get closer?"
"I think so.
They have fortresses of some sort atop the hills overlooking the city, but I don't see anything particularly dangerous." Below the clouds, it was pouring rain. Sparse fires lit a few of the areas below, drawing their attention to several colossal trees, or at least the remains of them. Elishnish glanced behind her as a sense of fury seeped through the bond with her mistress. Lady Zaradnik rarely grew angry, and this was the most anger that Elishnish had ever felt from her. "I've never even heard of trees so big," Lady Zaradnik said. "Did they cut them down somehow? It looks like they're gathering in them for some event." "2 of them look like open-air markets," Elishnish said. "There are temples? Maybe theaters. They're singing or performing or something. The rest of beastmen watching ones in the middle fight." "You mean like the arena in our winter?" "I guess. There aren't any humans in these ones." "Oh, speaking of which, do you see any new races down there?"
"I haven't seen any yet. I'll let you know if I do."
In the end, she couldn't spot any other races. Once Lady Zaradnik was satisfied with what she saw, they regained altitude and she looked toward the eastern horizon. "It should be dawn in a few hours," she said. "We should get back. There was something I wanted to see in the Draconic Kingdom's southern provinces, as well." "You don't want to see the rest of the country?"
"I do," Lady Zaradnik said,
"but I have other commitments. What we've seen should be good enough for the time being. It's abundantly clear that the Draconic Kingdom's foe is far more colossal than any of us ever imagined.